The neon signs of Precinct 847 cast their perpetual twilight across the rain-slicked streets of New Singapore Station. Detective Zorax's crystalline sensory filaments rippled in frustration as she studied the shattered security panel before her. This was the fourth warehouse break-in this cycle, and like the others, there was something oddly precise about it. "Analysis complete, Detective," chirped her AI assistant. "Breach pattern matches previous incidents. 98% probability of military-grade neural disruptors." Zorax's outer membrane flickered with bioluminescent patterns of concern. Military hardware wasn't something common thugs could access, not even in the lawless corners of human space. Her crystalline appendages traced the clean cuts in the metal, noting the complete absence of heat signatures. Whoever did this knew exactly how to bypass Volaren security systems. "Cross-reference with known operatives in the sector," she commanded, her translator converting her electromagnetic pulses into standard galactic common. The holographic display before her scrolled through thousands of profiles before settling on a single entry. Sarah Chen, former Terran Marine, decorated combat engineer. Current status: civilian contractor. Zorax's sensory filaments detected movement in the shadows before her optical processors could register it. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me," a human voice called out. A figure emerged from behind a cargo container, hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. The human was shorter than Zorax expected, but moved with the fluid grace of a predator. Her dark eyes held the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much combat. Yet there was something else there. Amusement. "Sarah Chen," Zorax stated, her law enforcement protocols automatically activating her defensive shields. "You've been busy." Chen smiled, an expression Zorax had learned meant either friendship or imminent danger when it came to humans. "Not as busy as the people I've been tracking. You're looking at this all wrong, Detective. These aren't break-ins. They're breadcrumbs." "Explain," Zorax demanded, though she kept her defensive posture. Her species had learned the hard way never to underestimate humans, even seemingly cooperative ones. "Someone's been using these warehouses as staging points for something bigger, something that's got the Terran Marines worried enough to send me in undercover." Chen pulled out a data chip and tossed it gently toward Zorax. "Your security systems didn't fail. They were tested, and they failed spectacularly." Zorax's analytical processes raced as she absorbed this information. "You're saying these break-ins were probing attacks. Why not come to local law enforcement?" "Because, Detective, we needed to know who we could trust." Chen's expression hardened. 3 cycles ago, a refugee transport vanished in this sector. 2 weeks later, another. The pattern suggests someone with inside knowledge of both military and law enforcement protocols. The implication sent ripples of distress through Zorax's crystalline structure. "You suspect infiltration of my precinct." "I suspect infiltration at every level. But your reaction to these break-ins, the way you investigated personally instead of passing it up the chain, that got our attention. We need someone like you, someone who still believes in doing things right." Zorax absorbed the data chip, her internal systems automatically scanning for threats before processing its contents. What she found made her outer membrane pulse with shock. Shipping manifests, corrupt security feeds, and most disturbing of all, genetic signatures of dozens of missing refugees. "This goes against every protocol," Zorax stated, her law enforcement training warring with the evidence before her. Chen laughed, a sound that Zorax's translator had difficulty processing. "Welcome to working with humans, Detective. We have a saying. Sometimes you have to break the rules to serve justice. And if I refuse to help, then I disappear, and you go back to investigating break-ins while more people vanish." Chen's smile returned, but there was steel behind it now. "But something tells me you won't. Your species values truth above all else. Can you really ignore this truth now that you've seen it?" Zorax's sensory filaments wavered as she processed her options. Every protocol demanded she arrest this human immediately. Every instinct told her there was more at stake. If, she emphasized the word carefully, I were to assist, what would be required of me? First, we need access to your precinct's internal communication networks. Someone's been coordinating these disappearances, and they're using official channels to do it. That would be a direct violation of about 15 regulations I know. But consider this. Those refugees who vanished, they put their trust in the system. In your system, how's that working out for them? Xerax felt her crystalline structure vibrate with tension. Humans had an infuriating ability to challenge the most fundamental assumptions of other species. Perhaps that's why they had survived and thrived despite their technological disadvantages. I will need time to verify your information, she said finally. You have 12 hours. After that, another transport arrives. 47 refugees, including 16 juveniles. Chen's voice carried no emotion now, just cold facts. Your choice, detective. Play it safe and stick to your protocols, or help me stop whatever's happening here. As Chen melted back into the shadows, Xerax found herself facing the kind of decision her training had never prepared her for. The data chip in her system contained enough evidence to launch a formal investigation, one that would take weeks to approve and longer to complete. The human way offered a faster solution, but at what cost to the system she had sworn to uphold. Her sensory filaments detected Chen's departure from the warehouse, but the human's words remained, challenging everything Xerax thought she knew about duty and justice. Perhaps that was the most unsettling thing about humans, their ability to make other species question their most deeply held beliefs. With a pulse of resignation, Xerax began composing her report, but for the first time in her career, she found herself choosing which details to omit. The human way, it seemed, was already influencing her. The neon lights of Precinct 847 continued their endless dance across the warehouse walls, indifferent to the moment of decision that had just taken place beneath them. Somewhere in the station above, a clock counted down to the arrival of the next refugee transport, and with it, the true test of where Xerax's loyalties would lie. The maintenance tunnels beneath New Singapore Station were never meant for a Valoran's crystalline form. Xerax's sensory filaments scraped against ancient pipes as she followed Chen through the labyrinthine network, her bioluminescence dimmed to near darkness. Your species really isn't built for stealth, Chen whispered, her thermal signature barely registering on Xerax's sensors. The human moved like a shadow, each step precisely placed despite the poor lighting. But I guess that's why they never expect a Valoran to go sneaking around. This is highly irregular, Xerax transmitted on their secure channel. If the station council discovers. They won't, Chen interrupted, holding up a hand. Her augmented eyes glowed faintly as she scanned ahead. Besides, irregular is exactly what we need right now. Your regular channels are compromised, remember. The past 12 hours had proven that beyond doubt. Xerax's discreet inquiries into the refugee transports had triggered immediate surveillance on her movements. If Chen hadn't warned her, she might have walked right into an administrative review, one she likely wouldn't have survived. They reached a junction where the maintenance tunnels intersected with an older section of the station. Chen pulled out a device that Xerax's systems couldn't quite categorize, something that shouldn't exist outside of military black ops. What we're about to see, Chen said, her voice grave, isn't going to fit into any of your neat little report categories. You ready for that? Xerax's outer membrane rippled with determination. I ceased filing standard reports the moment I entered these tunnels with you, human. Proceed. Chen's device disabled the security systems long enough for them to slip through a hidden access panel. The chamber beyond made Xerax's entire crystalline structure vibrate with horror. Stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a different species. Mantids, serpents, even a few Valoran juveniles, all supposedly processed through official refugee channels, all supposedly safe in their new homes. Bastards are getting bolder, Chen muttered, checking the pod readings. These are meant for long-term storage. They're not just trafficking refugees anymore, they're harvesting them. Xerex's analytical processes struggled to comprehend the scale of the operation. This facility would require enormous power consumption. How has this not been detected? Because, a new voice answered, the power readings are classified under station security protocols. Both Chen and Xerex spun to face the speaker. A drachnid emerged from the shadows, his scales gleaming dully in the emergency lighting. Xerex recognized him immediately. Station Security Chief Kralvix. "Sir," she began, her law enforcement protocols activating automatically. The maintenance tunnels beneath New Singapore Station were never meant for a Valoran's crystalline form. Xerex's sensory filaments scraped against ancient pipes as she followed Chen through the labyrinthine network, her bioluminescence dimmed to near darkness. "Your species really isn't built for stealth," Chen whispered, her thermal signature barely registering on Xerex's sensors. The human moved like a shadow, each step precisely placed despite the poor lighting. "But I guess that's why they never expect a Valoran to go sneaking around. This is highly irregular," Xerex transmitted on their secure channel. "If the station council discovers—" "They won't," Chen interrupted, holding up a hand. Her augmented eyes glowed faintly as she scanned ahead. "Besides, irregular is exactly what we need right now. Your regular channels are compromised, remember." The past 12 hours had proven that beyond doubt. Xerex's discreet inquiries into the refugee transports had triggered immediate surveillance on her movements. If Chen hadn't warned her, she might have walked right into an administrative review, one she likely wouldn't have survived. They reached a junction where the maintenance tunnels intersected with an older section of the station. Chen pulled out a device that Xerex's systems couldn't quite categorize, something that shouldn't exist outside of military black ops. "What we're about to see," Chen said, her voice grave, "isn't going to fit into any of your neat little report categories. You ready for that?" Xerex's outer membrane rippled with determination. "I ceased filing standard reports the moment I entered these tunnels with you, human. Proceed." Chen's device disabled the security systems long enough for them to slip through a hidden access panel. The chamber beyond made Xerex's entire crystalline structure vibrate with horror. Stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a different species. Mantids, serpents, even a few Valoran juveniles, all supposedly processed through official refugee channels, all supposedly safe in their new homes. "Bastards are getting bolder," Chen muttered, checking the pod readings. "These are meant for long-term storage. They're not just trafficking refugees anymore, they're harvesting them." Xerex's analytical processes struggled to comprehend the scale of the operation. This facility would require enormous power consumption. How has this not been detected? Because, a new voice answered, the power readings are classified under station security protocols. Both Chen and Xerex spun to face the speaker. A drachnid emerged from the shadows, his scales gleaming dully in the emergency lighting. Xerex recognized him immediately. Station Security Chief Kralvix. "Sir," she began, her law enforcement protocols activating automatically. "Save it, Detective," Kralvix sneered. "Your presence here has already told me everything I need to know about your loyalties." He turned his attention to Chen. "And you, human, always interfering where you're not wanted. Your species' obsession with playing hero is becoming tiresome." The refugee transport Morning Star descended through New Singapore Station's atmosphere shield like a wounded bird. From their vantage point in the converted maintenance drone, Xerex watched Chen manipulate the station's tracking systems with impressive skill. "Remind me again," Xerex transmitted on their secure channel, "how a former Marine learned to hack Galactic Council protocols." Chen's fingers never stopped moving across the holographic interface. "Let's just say the Corps teaches us to be resourceful. Besides, these aren't exactly standard protocols anymore. Your corrupt friends have modified them so much, they've created their own vulnerabilities." The transport's landing lights pulsed in sequence, 47 souls aboard, just as Chen had predicted. Zarax's crystals dimmed with concern as she processed their next steps. The station council will be monitoring this arrival personally, she noted. Even with falsified credentials, we cannot simply walk in and... Who said anything about walking? Chen interrupted, a familiar glint in her augmented eyes. Sometimes the best way through a front door is to make your own door. She pulled up a schematic of the docking bay. Remember those maintenance tunnels we explored? They run right under docking bay 7. Zarax's sensory filaments rippled with alarm. You cannot be suggesting a precision breach charge right through the floor. Chen's grin widened. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. While the council's welcoming committee is waiting at the main entrance, we'll be coming up right behind the transport. The structural damage will be minimal and totally worth it to save 47 lives. Chen's expression hardened. Unless you'd prefer to file a formal protest while those people disappear into storage pods. The barb struck home. Zarax had seen enough in the past day to know that traditional methods would fail these refugees. Still, her species' natural inclination toward order and procedure made Chen's plan feel like madness. The human way is chaos, she transmitted finally. The human way is adaptation, Chen corrected, checking her gear one last time. Chaos is just a tool we use when order fails us. Speaking of which, she handed Zarax a small device. Emergency shield generator. Military grade, because this is probably going to get messy. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of precise movements and calculated risks. Chen's breaching charge performed exactly as promised, burning through meters of station infrastructure to create their entrance. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and station security would detect them. Too late, and the consortium's agents would already have control of the transport. They emerged from the smoking hole in the docking bay floor just as the transport's main hatch began to cycle open. Through the reinforced viewports, Zarax could see the confused faces of the refugees. A mix of species all seeking sanctuary, all about to walk into a trap. Now comes the hard part, Chen muttered, pulling out her neural disruptor. We have to convince them to trust us instead of the official reception committee. As if on cue, the docking bay's main doors slid open. A delegation of station council members entered, led by none other than Council President Vaxthor himself. The manted ceremonial robes couldn't quite hide the weapons his honor guard carried. This is suicide, Zarax transmitted, even as she moved into position. Probably, Chen agreed cheerfully. But sometimes the craziest plans are the only ones that work. You ready to make history, detective? Before Zarax could respond, Shen stepped out from behind the transport's landing gear, her neural disruptor aimed at the council president. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings, she called out, her voice carrying across the bay. I'm afraid this reception is canceled. The council guards raised their weapons, but Chen's next words froze them in place. I wouldn't, unless you want the station's entire database of illegal trafficking operations uploaded to every news network in the sector. She gestured to Zarax, who emerged with her own weapon drawn. My friend here has her finger on the trigger, so to speak. One wrong move, and your entire operation goes public. President Vaxthor's antennae twitched with barely controlled rage. You dare threaten the station council with these baseless accusations. Baseless. Chen's laugh held no humor. Should we discuss the facility under Maintenance Section 12? The one full of stasis pods, or maybe the missing credits from the Refugee Assistance Fund? My partner here has been very thorough in her investigation. Zarax stepped forward, her crystals pulsing with carefully controlled patterns that any law enforcement officer would recognize as an official recording mode. Council President Vaxthor, you and your associates are under investigation for trafficking, corruption, and violations of multiple Galactic Council humanitarian laws. A tense silence fell over the docking bay. The refugees in the transport watched through their viewports, confusion and fear evident on their faces. The council guards looked to their president, waiting for orders. Vaxthor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You have no authority here. Neither of you do. This is a sovereign station, and you are interfering with official business. Actually, a new voice called from the transport's hatch. They have all the authority they need. A figure stepped out. Tall, distinguished, wearing the unmistakable uniform of a Galactic Council inspector. Xerx's sensors immediately recognized the credentials as genuine. Chen didn't even blink. Inspector Drake. Right on time. You knew. Xerx transmitted privately. Had to have backup plan, Chen replied. Told you Marines are resourceful. Inspector Drake descended the transport's ramp with measured steps. This entire station has been under investigation for months. Detective Xerx's evidence was the final piece we needed. He turned to the council president. Your operation is finished, Vaxthor. The only question is how many of your colleagues you're willing to take down with you. What followed was both anticlimactic and deeply satisfying. Council guards, faced with legitimate galactic authority, quickly switched allegiances. Vaxthor and his inner circle were taken into custody. The refugees, instead of disappearing into the consortium's facilities, were placed under direct Galactic Council protection. Hours later, as they watched Inspector Drake's team securing the underground facility, Chen finally allowed herself to relax slightly. You planned this, Xerx accused. From the beginning. The break-ins, the investigation, everything. Not everything, Chen admitted. Couldn't be sure who we could trust until you made your choice in that warehouse. After that, she shrugged. Let's just say humans are good at recognizing potential allies. Xerx's crystals pulsed with a complex mix of emotions. You took an enormous risk. If I had chosen differently. But you didn't. Chen's smile was genuine now. That's the thing about humans, Detective. We're pretty good at reading people, even crystalline ones. You just needed a push to see beyond the rules. As cleanup teams swarmed through the station, and news of the council's corruption began to spread, Xerx found herself reassessing everything. She thought she knew about duty, justice, and the peculiar species that had turned her ordered world upside down. What happens now? She asked. Chen checked a message on her comm unit and grinned. Now we go after the consortium itself. Unless, she raised an eyebrow. Unless you prefer to go back to regular police work. Xerx's answer was to pull up the classified files they'd recovered. The human way does seem to get results, she admitted. That it does, partner. That it does. Aurora Station hung in the void like a tarnished jewel, its massive solar arrays casting long shadows across the asteroid field it called home. From the bridge of the unmarked enforcement vessel Silent Justice, Chen studied the station's defense grid with the practiced eye of a veteran. 17 gun emplacements, 3 squadrons of automated defense drones, and enough sensor arrays to spot a dust mote at half a light year, she muttered. They're definitely expecting trouble. The consortium has had 3 weeks to prepare since New Singapore, Inspector Drake reminded them. They'll have moved most of their operation deeper into the station's secure zones. Xerx's crystalline form shifted through analytical patterns as she processed the tactical data. In the weeks since exposing the Council's corruption, she had learned to blend her species' natural precision with what Chen called human intuition. Right now, both were telling her something was wrong. These defenses, she transmitted, her sensors probing the station's outer ring. They're too obvious. The consortium deals in subterfuge and manipulation. Why suddenly display their military capabilities so boldly? Chen's augmented eyes narrowed. Because they want us to focus on the big guns while something else is happening. She pulled up a 3-dimensional map of the station's interior. Drake, what's the civilian population of Aurora Station? Officially, around 15,000. Mostly mining personnel and their families. Drake's expression darkened. Though our intelligence suggests at least a third of those are actually consortium operatives. And the rest are hostages, Chen concluded. Perfect cover. We can't just blast our way in without risking civilian casualties. She turned to Xerx. Remember those maintenance tunnels on New Singapore? Every space station has them, Zorax confirmed, her crystals pulsing with understanding. And if the consortium maintains their standard operating procedures, they'll have their own secret access points, Chen finished, probably tied into the mining operations, perfect for moving merchandise without attracting attention. Drake studied the sensor readings. The asteroid field makes precise scans impossible. We'd need to get much closer to map those tunnels, and that would trigger their defense grid. Unless, Chen's smile held that dangerous edge Zorax had come to recognize, we're not trying to avoid the defense grid at all. Over the next hour, Chen laid out a plan that made Zorax's normally ordered thought processes spiral into chaos. It was bold, reckless, and completely at odds with standard tactical doctrine. In other words, perfectly human. You want to trigger their defenses deliberately? Drake asked, incredulous. I want them to think they know exactly what we're doing, Chen corrected. A frontal assault is exactly what they're expecting. So we'll give them one, with just enough force to be believable, but not enough to actually threaten the station. Meanwhile, Zorax continued, her crystals pulsing with growing excitement as she grasped the strategy. A smaller team infiltrates through the mining access points, while their attention is focused on the main attack. 2 teams, Chen specified. 1 to locate and secure the civilian hostages, 1 to breach their command center and secure their data cores before they can purge the evidence. Drake shook his head in amazement. The timing would have to be perfect. 1 mistake, and either team could be trapped inside with no way out. Then we don't make mistakes. Chen turned to Zorax. You up for some more tunnel crawling, detective? After New Singapore, I believe I have developed what humans call a knack for it. The assault began 3 hours later. The Silent Justice and 2 other enforcement vessels launched what appeared to be a standard containment operation. Aurora Station's defensive grid responded exactly as expected, filling space with enough firepower to worry any conventional attack force. What the consortium's defenders didn't notice were the 2 small maintenance pods that slipped through the asteroid field, using the larger rocks as cover. By the time the station's sensors might have detected them, the pods had already attached themselves to abandoned mining access points. Zorax found herself once again crawling through maintenance tunnels, though these were considerably larger than those on New Singapore. Chen led the hostage rescue team, while Zorax commanded the data retrieval mission. Both were operating on a strict timeline. They had to reach their objectives before the consortium realized the main attack was a diversion. Contact. Chen's voice crackled over their secure channel. We found the civilian detention area. Security is heavier than expected. Proceeding with alternate approach. Zorax wanted to ask what that meant, but her own team was approaching their target. The station's main data core was housed in a heavily shielded chamber, but the consortium had made one critical mistake. They'd assumed no one would approach it through maintenance shafts rated only for crystalline repair drones. Advantage of having a Valoran on the team. One of her human squad mates quipped as they watched her crystalline form squeeze through an access port designed for machines a quarter her size. The data core itself was surprisingly unguarded. Another sign the consortium never expected anyone to reach it through this route. Zorax's technical expertise made quick work of the security protocols, and soon they were downloading everything. Transaction records, client lists, blackmail material, and most importantly, the location of every trafficking facility in 3 sectors. That's when everything went wrong. Multiple hostile contacts. Chen's voice cut through the comm channel. They're using the civilians as shields. We need static, immediate assistance. Zorax's team was already moving, following the station schematics they'd memorized. They found Chen's team pinned down in a massive cargo bay, exchanging fire with consortium forces who had positioned themselves behind groups of terrified civilians. They're not just shields, Chen shouted as Zorax's team provided covering fire. They're rigging them with neural disruptors. If we don't secure those controls, she didn't need to finish. Neural disruptors could turn organic matter to soup with the press of a button. The consortium was making it clear. Either they walked away, or nobody did. What happened next would later be described in official reports as a masterful display of interspecies tactical cooperation. The reality was messier, more desperate, and pure human inspiration mixed with Valoran precision. Chen's teams launched a series of micro-EMP devices, not powerful enough to harm the civilians, but perfect for creating sensor ghosts and confusion. Meanwhile, Zorax's crystalline form began to pulse with complex patterns of light, creating disorienting reflections off the station's metallic surfaces. In the chaos that followed, it became impossible for the consortium forces to tell which targets were real and which were phantom readings. When the smoke cleared, the civilians were safe, and the consortium's leadership found themselves in custody. Hours later, as medical teams attended to the freed hostages and enforcement vessels secured the station, Chen found Zorax in the data core chamber, still downloading evidence. "Nice light show back there," Chen commented. "Don't think I've ever seen a Valoran use their natural bioluminescence as a tactical advantage before. And I have never seen anyone use sensor ghosts to create an entire phantom assault team." Zorax responded. "It seems we are both learning new tricks." Chen smiled. "That's what I love about working with other species. There's always something new to learn." She paused, studying a data readout. "Speaking of learning, looks like we've only scratched the surface. The consortium's reach goes way deeper than we thought." "Then we keep digging," Zorax stated firmly. "The human way." "The human way," Chen agreed, with a little Valoran precision thrown in. Outside Aurora Station, the asteroid field continued its eternal dance, indifferent to the small victory for justice that had just occurred. But somewhere in those tunnels and corridors, something new had been born, a partnership that would become legend in law enforcement circles across the galaxy. The human way, it turned out, worked best when combined with the best qualities of other species. And that was just the beginning. Outside Aurora Station, the asteroid field continued its eternal dance, indifferent to the small victory for justice that had just occurred. But somewhere in those tunnels and corridors, something new had been born, a partnership that would become legend in law enforcement circles across the galaxy. The human way, it turned out, worked best when combined with the best qualities of other species, and that was just the beginning. 6 months after Aurora Station, the Galactic Council's main chamber buzzed with tension. Representatives from 17 species filled the tiered seats, all waiting for the testimony that would shake the foundations of their carefully ordered society. Zorax stood at the witness podium, her crystalline form perfectly still as she transmitted her findings to the assembled council. Behind her, Chen sat in the witness area, for once wearing a proper dress uniform instead of her usual tactical gear. The evidence recovered from Aurora Station reveals corruption extending far beyond simple trafficking operations, Zorax stated, her translator converting her patterns into clear, precise galactic common. The consortium had infiltrated every level of governance across multiple sectors. Their operations touched everything from refugee placement to military procurement. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. A Drachnid representative rose to his feet. "These are extraordinary claims, Detective. Claims that could destabilize decades of established order." "Order?" Chen's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. The human stood, ignoring protocol. "Is that what you call it when children disappear into stasis pods? When refugees fleeing war zones end up as test subjects? That's not order. That's just tyranny wearing a fancy mask." "Commander Chen," the council leader warned, "you have not been recognized to speak." "Then recognize this." Chen activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. Images filled the air: stasis pods, surgical theaters, genetic laboratories, everything Detective Zorax just described. "This is what it looks like. This is what your order was protecting." Zorax's sensory filaments detected the shift in the chamber's emotional atmosphere: horror, denial, anger, but most importantly, recognition. The council could no longer hide behind bureaucracy and procedure. We have transmitted complete data packets to every member world's law enforcement agencies, Zorax continued. The evidence is conclusive and independently verified. The consortium's operations spanned hundreds of worlds, moved billions in illegal credits, and affected countless lives. And what would you have us do? A manted representative demanded. Tear down systems that have maintained peace for generations. Create chaos in the name of justice. Sometimes, Chen replied, her voice softer now, but no less intense. You have to break something to fix it properly. She turned to address the entire chamber. We're not asking you to tear everything down. We're asking you to build something better. Something that protects everyone, not just those with power and credits. Zerex's crystals pulsed in agreement. The human concept of justice is imperfect, messy, sometimes chaotic, but it contains one crucial element that our current systems lack: the courage to change when change is needed. The council chambers fell silent as the implications sank in. What followed was 6 hours of intense debate, procedural maneuvering, and finally, decision. The consortium's assets would be seized. Their operations would be dismantled. Most importantly, a new joint task force would be created, one specifically designed to prevent such corruption from taking root again. Later, in a quiet observation lounge overlooking the council world's capital city, Chen and Zorax watched the sun set over the sprawling metropolis. They're offering me command of the task force, Chen said, breaking the comfortable silence. Want to guess who I'm recommending as my second in command? Zerex's crystals rippled with amusement. I assume you require someone who can tolerate your unorthodox methods while providing proper procedural oversight. I was thinking more along the lines of someone who's learned to think outside the box while keeping one crystal in a rulebook. Chen smiled. We made a good team, Detective. The human way and the Valderan way working together. Imagine what we could do with actual authority and resources behind us. There will be resistance, Zorax noted. Many prefer the comfortable corruption they know to uncertain change. Good thing we're not giving them a choice. Chen's augmented eyes gleamed with determination. The galaxy's changing, partner. The old ways of doing things, the comfortable corruptions and convenient blindness, none of that works anymore. We proved that. Zorax considered this. In less than a year, her entire worldview had shifted. She had learned to see beyond rules and regulations to the principles they were meant to serve. She had watched a human teach her about justice, while she taught that same human about precision and procedure. The task force will need a name, she transmitted finally. Chen grinned. Already got one approved. Interspecies Justice Division. IGD for short. She paused. Though some of the Marines are already calling it innovation and justified destruction. Humans and their acronyms. Zorax's crystals pulsed with what Chen had learned to recognize as laughter. Very well, Commander. When do we begin? Already started, partner. Chen pulled up a holographic display showing multiple active investigations across the galaxy. Turns out the consortium was just the beginning. There's a lot more out there that needs fixing. As they began reviewing the cases, Zorax reflected on how far she had come from her days as a precinct detective. The human way had taught her that sometimes the most important rules were the ones you wrote yourself, in service of a higher justice. Out in the galaxy, corruption and crime continued their eternal dance. But now, they faced something new. A partnership that bridged species and methodologies, combining human adaptability with Valderan precision. The old order was changing, and for the first time in generations, justice had some new tricks up its sleeve. The sun set on the council world, but for Chen and Zorax, it was just the beginning of a new day. There were wrongs to right, systems to fix, and most importantly, a new way of doing things to establish. After all, the human way worked best when it learned from others and taught them in return. End.